compliance method is weak or wrong. You understand what I mean? Okay. And yeah, Andrei. Oh, perfect. So the next steps, I think it's, I check if it, yeah, it's good, the next step. Market demand and marketing rollout, and here we are on the, in our topic, where is a market demand? Increase professional skills in sizing. So sizing is also very much important because it is related to the power and the energy, so kilowatts. So and then we look, when we think on the grid, and we think that we will go more and more to intermittent electricity production, and that the energy carrier will be more and more electricity, then the power will be an essential outcome. Much more maybe than the kilowatt hours, than the energy needs. So we need also the skills in sizing, the energy use, your low carbon, renewables, and I could add storage and all of these things. So the industrials for the rollout could be also the front runners, because in CEN we have the European standards have a modular structure. And for example, we have a standard, a specific standard for heat pumps. And so then the training could be complete existing industrial training. A lot of industrials have their building their academies where they train the installers. And then they could add, for example, we think they could add the CEN-CE modules on this training. Would be very interesting, because then the installer would get at the same time, will be at the same time a certified experts, because a CEN-CE scheme, you will see it after, is a very modular structure. Okay. Yeah, this is what is also, this is the same what is written on the screen. And then of course the cooperation, and this is a very much important point. So we can do nothing without you, without the European countries, the other countries. The cooperation, the integration and the recognition with existing voluntary schemes. Well, it could be, for example, the environmental schemes. I think on the French HQE or on the German DGNB or on others. And also, so here they could integrate, for example, the European standards, also CEN-CE, they could be integrated in these schemes. And also, for example, of course, national and mandatory schemes like the EPCs or the national training schemes or things like this. Yeah, so this is this practical rollout of the CEN-CE scheme. I don't think that it should be standalone. I think it should more or less complete existing schemes. And I think, okay, yeah. And if you have a little bit visual or a quick overview, if you want to have a quick overview of what is in CEN-CE, I recommend you to go to the CEN-CE website, where we have 2 pitch videos. One, you see it also on the screen here. Where we have one for technology manufacture, so for the industrials. And I told you already that we consider them that could be the front runners. We have also one for the building technology designers and installers. And last but not least, there is also a pitch video. You see it's a little bit longer, it's 4 minutes, for the CEN-CE Learning Management Scheme. So we have an online training scheme already implemented. And then, last but not least, I think it's only be thank you. Yeah, thank you for your patience and thank you for coming. And I'm looking forward for the future discussions with you.
Thank you very much, Johann. So it's time for our next speaker, Laurent Socal. The floor is yours. Let's see if with your DNA the clicker works faster. Okay, it goes.
Probably. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And I hope I can use this, otherwise I will not be a good trainer if I cannot use the technology for this. So a few words about myself. I don't know what will be my job, and I will be soon retired, so I have few time to decide. No, I have a very vast experience. I started as an installer of burners, industrial burners. And a burner is something with hydraulics, with electricity, with structures, if it's industrial. So this has been a good training practice. And now I have also experience outside the buildings, in the pharma industry, for example, a lot of things I will let you read. And a lot of time I'm also a trainer, both for professionals and for even the low-level installers. And then you have to adapt your language and, of course, provide information which is, I would say, very often missing in the heating industry. And we are losing a category of professionals that were able really to do something on installation. Now they are usually very often only spare parts changer. And that's different than being a real maintenance man. Well, why is training needed? Well, I think our whole life is a never-ending learning process. The true training is working 3,000 hours a year with your brain connected and being curious and trying to understand what you do. That's the real training, and that's what we call experience after some time. But so why training, since we are doing this? It's the fact that something new appears and it's always faster and faster. So you need a place where to put your experience. So the basics to understand what happens so that you can profit of your experience. That's why you see a place for everything and everything in its place. And it starts with a place for everything. You should know the basics. We are very keen about this in the CEN-CE scheme. First, start the basics, the fundamentals. Otherwise, no chance to understand how it was standardized. So this is the first step. And so this training shall prepare the right place. More or less, the training is something like a spark, and which should ignite a process that it's your task in your everyday life to complete. And we have two new challenges, for example. One is a high level. One is about the technology. We are slowly shifting from boilers to heat pumps. That's happening. No? So that causes a problem because we are used since decades to use boilers. So you have habits, consolidated habits in design, installation, use, maintenance, and so on. So now we have a completely different concept. And the installation cost, for example, for kilowatt is quite high, so you need a correct sizing. Sizing of boilers is very forgiving. Sizing a heat pump is another story. And heat pumps do not behave like boilers. And you must be very careful, for example, about flow temperature. So you should know the basics. Otherwise, you don't know the importance of calculating a flow temperature in a calculation process of the energy performance. And this depends on hydraulic circuits. You have to recognize and take into account. And that's one of the issues. The second issue is that now, in the past, we only had buildings using energy. Delivered energy, multiply the weighting factor, quite simple, straightforward. And now we are exporting. And when you export energy and interact with the grid, this causes new concerns. And here again, you have to know very well the basics. Otherwise, there are things that are game-changing which can be ignored. And we will see this with some examples from the training. And so, PV is becoming a popular basic on-site resource for buildings. We speak renewable, and then you end up with PV and some thermal solar, and probably something else for the moment. Probably in the future something more. So interaction with the grid is required, and net result depends on the evaluation of the interaction with the grid. So we have to understand this correctly. New concept for designers and installers. Why standards? And why EN standards? We've heard the presentation from Pau before, and we know that figures are appearing in the APBD directive. If you put figures, then you need a standardized and traceable calculation method, because if you want to put a limit, you need a meter so that you can measure your building, and the regulation will put a red line, this is the limit. But if you change the calculation behind, you change the regulation, actually. So you need a precise reference. And you need an hourly methodology. Why? Because the interaction with the grid is based on an hourly process. Monthly, you can't say nearly nothing. So you have to go through hourly. You need electricity balance for the hourly interaction. This is covered by the EN ISO 52000-1, the overarching standard. And the description of the building and the system should not change compared to our habits we had in the past. Because if you change the description, then it's another work to learn and so on. So if you look at the AN standard and the mandate M4080, there are fully spelled equations, so fully traceable, hourly method, minimal update of the description of the building, and a building envelope and technical system, and a common EU frame. The alternative is 30 different methods. So that's why it was interesting to start with directly with the EN standard. So we need for a common meter. So what about the CEN-CE methodology? Of course, it's not just detailing equation. I already told you that. If you want to understand and master technology, first you need to understand the basics. After that, you can understand how it was standardized, and that's why each of our modules start with the basics. And then you have to test it to have a minimal feeling of what the calculation does. So you need some training tool to be able to do some calculation. If you just present a line of equations, I don't think the result will be very productive. So you need also tools to do a minimum testing on your own before going with professional software or anything else. So you need simplified calculation for a test profile. We'll see this as an example. And usually I use this example to illustrate what I mean. You know, in the automation industry, you speak about safety integrity level. When you want to be sure that it will work, think about the traffic light. If there is a mistake in the command of the traffic lights, I think the result will be disaster. So how do you proceed in practice when you need safety? Well, you could say, okay, I will put 2 PLCs in parallel. That's nice, but if you have a software mistake, you will replicate the same software mistakes on the two machines. So what's the better approach? Use 2 different PLCs with 2 different programmers, and if 2 different machines go to the same result, okay, it's very likely that they are both correct. And that's one of the principles. It's called parallel asymmetric processing. Okay? What does this mean for us? It means that when you are a designer, installer, or an assessor, you have processor 1, which is a software, which is your calculation software, and this strictly obeys to the input. Sorry, I'm just using them wrong. Okay. It says no fantasy, no initiative, no awareness. You can put any value, it will process it, and damn fast. Can handle tons of details. Sorry again. And doesn't learn from experience. Not yet, because with artificial intelligence, we don't know. Probably it will learn in the near future. And then on the other side, you have you have the processor number 2, which is your brain. It evaluates the input, it has initiative, it can invent new solution, should be in control of fundamentals, damn slow in calculation, but can handle a few numbers and shall be trained and learns from experience. So if both go to the same result, we are safe that it was a good process. That's why fundamentals are very important. So how is organized our training? Every time you have a training, you have an introduction, of course, you have fundamentals, and then you have the calculation method, which is detailed, which is the output data, which is a required input, and is classified what depends on product, what depends on operation, and calculation procedure and application example, straightforward. What are the tools? Of course, technical presentation. Then we have handbooks. That is, let's say, a resume of the standard with the chain of equations so that you have a quick reference. But then you have hands-on XLS. It means simplified Excels that allows you simple testing. And then you have the complete XLS with the custom interface. This is the added value that you have an Excel for each of the modules with a clear interface. And we will see some details about this to get the flavor. So fundamentals, of course, description of the physics and the important phenomena of the technology. So the expected result is that you understand. And I will skip because I already told you this several times. So let's make an example. Don't be worried. I will not read the equations. It's just to know what is the 52,000-1 if we present just the equation. 50 of these kind of things, and you can see here the length of the subscripts. Why it is so? Because 52,000 has to handle an hourly balance, hourly weighting factors, evaluation of exported energy, possible inclusion of non-EPB uses, need for partial performance indicators by building unit, by service, by zone, and scalability to other levels, like energy communities. If you combine all these requirements, of course, we'll end up with something which is complicated because reality is complicated. Sometimes you have a complaint. Why do we have complicated standards? If you don't want complicated standards, just build simple buildings. But that's not what we want. So we are obliged to go through. So how to handle this? Start with the fundamentals. And this is an example about exported energy. Okay? So it's a simple picture. Now we can understand much easier. It's easier to understand. As is a typical case in the past. You need 1 kilowatt-hour electricity to light up your lamp. It comes from here, because the real impact is the impact on the environment, in case of energy, the impact is that you're using a non-renewable source. And to get 1 kilowatt-hour here, this is calculated on site, but you have to represent what happens outside your buildings. So you have a primary energy factor, but it could be an emission factor, it could be a cost factor. That's called weighting in general, because you have different ways of weighting the delivered energy. We all know here it's 1 kilowatt-hour, but what's the effect of this kilowatt-hour? Energy, emission, economics, and the result is not the same. And that's another thing that people has to learn. Class A means something, not everything. And you might have huge surprises. So until now, it's quite straightforward, 2.5. That's clear, non-renewable, maybe 2, maybe 1 into your Norway. Lucky, all hydropower. So of course it's different. And that's natural that you have differences, but you have to understand what you are representing. Then you can complicate with exchanges between grids. And so it makes things even more complicated. But the basics is you are representing what happens outside. And this can change during the day. During the day, you can have a different mix. And that's why you would use hourly weighting factors. And that's already supported by the standard. No? But here, I think you can understand the concept. And now we can make one step forward. One step forward now, I'm using PV now. Quite simple again. I still have only one source. I weight this. We can argue about this value 1 for 1 kilowatt-hour renewable as primary energy. Of course, it will be a 0 for cost, running cost, not installation cost, and so on, and so on. Until now, it's clear. But now, that's the question. You turn the light off. Your PV panel is running. Okay, capturing electricity, or capturing solar radiation, transforming into electricity, but you don't use it. So you export it. Now, what are you doing here? And here you have two solutions. Either you think, okay, I'm exporting 1 kilowatt-hour, I'm saving the generation of 2.5, or the use of 2.5 kilowatt-hours of non-renewable, because I already input into the grid 1 kilowatt-hour. So you say, it's worth minus 2.5 primary energy. But you could also say, well, I'm sending into the grid 1 kilowatt-hour renewable energy, which will be used by the next building in my community. So which is the right one? Well, there's no right or wrong. It depends. If you are doing some accounting, there are costs and revenue and what you invoice, no? The value. And the difference is your benefit. You just need to agree. And if you go further, you could ask the question, well, I want to calculate the impact of providing comfort to my building. Okay, this 1 kilowatt-hour, is it providing comfort to my building? Question mark. And that's something you could think about to select which is the right solution. And this applies to all the possible weightings, because you can do the same for the weighting about CO2 emission, you can do the same for the cost, for example, and you can have a different cost for import and export. So you see, even this choice, which is the right approach? Is this the cost? This is the example of the cost. This is how much it costed to provide that kilowatt hour that I exported. And this is the benefit. So from this, you can see, and which is one of the main points, for example. Now we have the definition of of zero emission buildings, how do we account exported energy? And if you change this consideration, this is a game changer, totally game changer. And this we have to understand clearly. And then if we understand this, when you do the selection about the parameters, then we can understand what we are doing and if the results make sense when we see the results, the last figure at the end of the calculation of our software. Okay, that was an example. But now you need some training because you want to practice. So you can do this. You take this simplified spreadsheet where you see a heat pump, just a PV panel. You can click on the buttons. So you increase the production of PV electricity, and you can observe the balance here. And first, you do the balance by taking into account only the costs, which is called step A, or you can put into the game the exported energy. By clicking here, you decide 0 or 1, and you can see your result. And if you slowly proceed from 0 to a higher value, you can see what happens here with some weird values, negative values for primary energy, negative value for the renewable energy ratio. Why is that? But if you practice here, you can understand what is the meaning. It has a meaning. It's not weird. It is the message that comes from this kind of calculation, which has a physical meaning in any case. But if you can see this simplified, it's quite easier than with the total sheet. Okay? And the same, for example, what does time mismatch mean? Okay, you have your lighting. I put a PV, so I have my lighting. Yes, sorry, but you need this during the night. And there's no sun, probably. Well, in the offices, you need lighting in the day. We need lighting even now here because we have no windows sometimes. But okay, that's something you must evaluate. Usually one thinks, okay, lighting, that's in the night. Why PV and compensate? So that's why this is typically on an hourly basis. If you want to evaluate and decide if I'm allowed to compensate or not. This is also a consequence of the choice we illustrated before. So you can see how much consideration we can do even on simple examples to give you insight into this important standard. And if you want the cold picture, of course, you have the full XLS, and you have also some interfaces. It means you have an interface explaining, oh, you did this calculation, how much were the needs that you took into consideration, what was the configuration more or less, and which are the energy flows, which is the electricity balance, and you have all the figures. You can see the total picture for a sample calculation. So you also have interfaces, which is an added value to the bare Excel for the calculation. Just another example, very quick, about distribution. And again, these are quite interesting equations that probably we all have seen in our books, probably. And I don't know if we are using this every day, even if you are a designer. But what is interesting is not only detailing the equation, it's really understanding what happens after that. If you make just a sample Excel and do a sample calculation once in your life, probably during a training, and they ask you, okay, but please calculate the linear transmittance as a function of the insulation thickness. And you will discover that you can insulate as much as you want, there is a limit. And you get always to the same limit. So no chance to say, oh, I have losses in my network, I will insulate. I must be very careful because the network are losing energy, and whatever your idea, they lose more. If you're lucky, it's recovered. Otherwise, it's a mess. And I think the experience of very hot corridors in summer because there is the hot water line, or if you compare the needs for hot water and the losses with the distribution, it will be quite interesting. But this is just by understanding the basics, this has also a lot of side effects which are independent on just learning a standard. Standard is just one way to represent something in a common way so that we can understand and compare, for example, for regulatory purpose. But we have to understand what's behind. Otherwise, it's just blind calculation. So this is what, that's another thing which is very important. That's very instructive every time you have a teaching. Start always with a question. What's a heat pump? And listen to your attendants. I think at the very beginning when we started the training about energy certificates, my first question was always, what is energy? So you want to speak about energy? Okay, what's energy? Can you tell me an example? How could you represent 1 joule, for example? What's something that happens and involves 1 joule? So that we understand if you really know what you're doing. Because when your training means that at the end, when you hear a word, something lightens up in your brain and says, that's it. I have an example. I have the feeling of what happens. So, and you could also ask some other questions. Because, for example, if there is one question, what's a HIPAA? Or the other question could be, okay, we're all speaking about energy efficiency, energy bills. Who in this room knows its own energy bill? Okay, you all know, I'm sure. But if you go into designers, installers, they all speak about cost, but then what's yours energy bill? And that's very instructive. That's a technique also for teaching. You must provoke emotions. They feel, oh, I don't know. That's why, and they will remember. So, heat pumps fundamentals. So that's I will not annoy you too much about heat pumps because I think you know every one of you knows very well heat pumps, and it's a very very interesting machine, very efficient but extremely sensitive to operating conditions. So if you don't design correctly, if you don't commission your system, no chance. So you have to understand, for example, this. And in the standards, of course, you have to know where do I deal with operating temperatures. And so this is the example why I'm speaking about heat pump, because now we will have a flavor about what is the complete Excel supporting one of these trainings. So if you have a complete Excel about heat pumps, here you have the list of the elements that you have in each Excel. You have an input interface. So you present the data in a way that you can understand it. So first you have, for example, this is a case of the qualitative options. What is your source? External air. And are you using a default calculation or do you use another calculation model? What's the sink? Technical water, installation water. What's the technology? Electric, absorption. So you have a number of choices, and that's what makes difficult, for example, the calculation of heat pumps, because you have a lot of possible choices. You have to learn how to react to all these kind of technologies. And it will be, so input interface, and this is for qualitative data, and then you have an interface to quantitative data. I mean, for example, the standard conditions, COP, and so on. So then you have base profiles. I will explain what's that, base profiles. An input series, method input, we'll go through this one very quickly. So base profiles, you want to experiment. You want to experiment hourly? Well, you need some preloaded data. So you have base profiles. And here you have, for example, the hourly data, but you can select from a test profile, from a profile. You select here and you load the data. So you have preloaded examples supporting your teaching. And now we go into the obvious details. So each calculation step each single equation is detailed in the Excel. So you know each step of the calculation. And if you want to review what happened at a specified interval, you just load the data for the time step 23 because something strange happened. I have a COP value strange. I want to understand how was this value generated. So just sum there and have a look and investigate what happened. And here you have really a complete reference because what you're calculating, the symbol, values, and the equation that was used in that calculation step. And of course, you need a method output. And what is interesting is that you have a small macro, and you can repeat the calculation for a number of selected calculation intervals. So you could have a typical week, and then change option and recalculate just this week, so that you can do some tailor. Of course, an Excel for 1 year calculation is a little bit heavy. It takes minutes to calculate. But something significant is a question of seconds. So it's quite practical and usable. And of course, the method outputs, the list of all the outputs. And that's interesting also having an output interface. This is an example of your test profile. It's a test profile which stresses a heat pump with an increasing load, and you can see how much heat is provided by the heat pump, And you see the COP, which is, of course, falling at 0 because of intermittent operation, going to a peak, and then going here. Here you are introducing some backup energy, so your COP for the system drops because you're using energy. So sometimes it's not interesting to have the whole year, but to use a stress profile. So how does my system react progressively to a changing load? And that's very instructive. So you can see here, this is then repeated for different source and sink temperatures. So you can see the difference when the source temperature increase, okay, I can fulfill the whole load because with high air temperature, I have a lot of much power output available. So I can fulfill the whole load. And you see the effect for two different flow temperatures. And some statistics, for example, my COP, what happens. And here you have also, for example, what happens for the distribution of the load factor depending on the outdoor temperature. We spoke about, for example, design. This is the result of an energy performance calculation. There is valuable information, extremely valuable information for the design process from the energy performance calculations. This is also important to know. This is, of course, especially for designers. From the energy performance standard, you can extract a lot of information for the design. And for heat pumps, that's critical because oversizing costs money and compromise and is deteriorating your performance. So conclusions. So I'm ending annoying you with my presentation. Of course, my wine is the best on the market, of course. So you have also in the scheme, you have all technical features and dedicated supporting tools to provide an effective training. You have seen an example of the supporting tools that has been provided, so to allow you some experience directly in the training. It's based on a modern IT platform, so you can blend self-training and, of course, interactive sessions. Because as the example of today, I've explained you something. I think it was interesting if it is in person. It's not that easy to do this online through a video. You can try, but not so effective. So you have to blend and to have interaction for your questions and so on. So main obstacle are practical barriers. I think Johann already spoke about this, and this is really sometimes a concern. National and regional training schemes and are also linked to the compulsory qualification of design people. And this is sometimes a barrier, and we have to integrate into this if you want to go through. And of course, national calculation method. But if you understood the fundamentals, I guess you can understand how the EN standardize your process and how your national standard is doing the same, if you really understood the basics. So, thank you. If you have any question, we are here to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Let's see. I guess for me it will work easily. Yes. So, as I said, Cătălin kindly excuses himself that he cannot be with us today. But there is a real reason why Romania is the pilot country, not just because Cătălin was elected president. I mean, he entered in last weekend as president. It's because in Romania they recently revised the building performance calculation methodology, and as of last year, there is already the new methodology, which is based on the set of EPB standards. It hasn't yet entered into force. As I understood, it will be by the end of this year, normally. There have been some political delays. I don't know the details, so I will not go in them. Administrative, okay. You see, I don't know the details. So that's the main reason why we chose Romania as a pilot country, and there's also a strong interest from our Romanian association, and we have here today with us Johann Zirngibl, the president of the Romanian association that has been involved in REHVA ever since I'm part of the REHVA family. So many years before that, he was already present here. And I'm really glad that I can present on behalf of the Romanian colleagues and share with you what we have done so far. So I have 3 slides. I'll be very brief and rather save time for the exchange. So Johann has painted the big picture. Laurent has provided the juicy part of how it actually brings added value in day-to-day activities, because this is, I think, what all of us are looking for, not to do something that in theory might have added value, but in our day-to-day activities. We are practitioners, many of us. We need to be linked with the standardization, with research, with policy, but at the end of the day, we also need to make business. So, as Laurent pointed out, in the CEN-CE project, we have prepared the IT infrastructure to support the rollout of the scheme. We imagine the scheme with a central scheme operation, and we have the scheme operator, which is the EPB Center, that also provides consultancy and services based on the EPB standards. So this is our training and certification workstream now as part of the EPB Center. And we need national training operators to roll it out because we know there is always a language gap, and if you want to reach building professionals, you need to speak their mother tongue. Otherwise, it will not happen. Not at the scale needed for reaching our goals in terms of decarbonization and so on. This is a snapshot from our learning management system, which supports basically the interaction also in the virtual world. We have, of course, many ways of meeting now. We have tested the limits during COVID times, so we can do almost anything online. And this is just an illustration of the heating standards and the overarching standard, just for you to have a flavor. And we also designated here, in principle, the order that you would go through, the logical order. Of course, in a country like Romania, where you have the set of EPB standards coming up, entering into force, it's valuable or invaluable to do all modules. But in other countries where this is not yet happening, you just extract some certain components which bring this added value. And heat pumps, I think, are a great example, what Laurent just showed, where you can make something that now is invisible, you make it visible, take actions, and have real impact, not only theoretical. Basically, this platform serves all the processes that would need to happen, because there's always a first step where you need to transfer the knowledge. Laurent, for example, he's a master, the so-called master trainer. Then we need to transfer this knowledge, and this is what we are doing currently in Romania. We are transferring the knowledge to the national trainers, so they become certified trainers. That's step number one, the transfer of knowledge. As of that moment in time, the central scheme operator has a licensing agreement with the national training operator, and the standards need to be, of course, translated into national language, as I already said. And basically, as of that moment in time, the steering wheel is in the national training operator's hands to roll out the scheme, to do marketing on it, and showcase the utility. And everything can happen either physically, either virtually. As I said, we have the platform if there's a need or a preference for some people to join remotely. I can illustrate what we did in Romania. We already started last year. It was the pilot country, so it usually takes longer the first time you do it. And we organized either live sessions, which we recorded and then uploaded in the learning management system to have something constant to check when you need it. Or we had pre-recorded sessions and we only organized the interaction part. Because as Laurent pointed out, we tested during the implementation of the project. We had 2 physical pilot trainings and 1 in the LMS. And if you just have a video recording, you don't get anywhere. It's already much better than just the supporting documents, but you need this interaction. And ideally, as Laurent said, it should be like here today. I'm really glad to be here in person with all of you. But sometimes it's not possible. The key point is to get the transfer of knowledge and empower building professionals to actually have an impact. So that's in a nutshell, the process. And in parallel, we are trying to build value. So in Romania, what we did, we contacted the national standards body, because you need the standards, you need the tools and the training. This is like the sequence, but you need them all. So we already discussed and are close to signing an agreement with the national standards body to provide access via the LMS to view the set of EPB standards in national language, because sometimes you want to go deeper on a certain vertical, and maybe you cannot reach Laurent so easily. He might be giving a training or participating in a workshop at CLIMA, but you always have the standards as a reference. And this basically streamlines the access to the standards. In some countries, you already have this subscription-based access to the standards. But in other countries, you can only buy them, either electronic or hard copy. And sometimes, if you want the full set, it can get quite high, the price. So we imagine this. I mean, there are so many platforms today, I will not name any of them. But you know that at a very low cost, you could get access and be empowered. And it should be attached to the training. And we are thinking of means to make it even more valuable, but this is what I can share for the time being, something concrete that will happen in Romania. So that was it in a nutshell. So I think we are 10 minutes behind schedule, so I will stop talking, rather give the microphones to both Laurent and Johann. The only other thing that I want to say is that we covered 4 EU member states, and at REHVA we were EU level, so we didn't cover any particular national language. But we have already translated the standards that I put earlier on the screen in French, and Francis, you know who did it, in Croatian, in Slovakian, and as well in Italian. So we haven't yet defined at EPB Center the priority, and that's why we also want to have a discussion today with you guys. If you want to ask certain questions about the process, or if you would just like to share the experience in your countries, and if you think this could fly, and how you think it could fly, maybe we could start with these countries, especially those that are present here today, to share your opinion. But before I do that, I'm really honored to have today in the room with us our keynote speaker of the day, Pau Garcia Audi, and at the same time the ASHRAE president, Mick Schredler. Thank you very much for having joined us. And I just wanted to give you 1-2 minutes if you want to say anything. I know, Pau, it's out of the blue. I didn't tell you anything. So I was just thinking of this Pact on Skills, if you think there's anything relevant that we should take into account with our scheme, because it's the first time we design this sort of EU-wide scheme for building performance assessment.
Thanks. No, I came here to listen because the issue of common certification schemes is quite relevant to us. There is a lot of mobility for professionals. I myself have worked in Spain, UK, when the UK was part of the EU, and now Brussels. So it is very necessary to have this common certification. And I like very much what you say. Okay, there can be a core that is common to everybody, and then some particularities. Because I don't know, maybe heat pumps is not the best example, but I don't know, domestic hot water may be more relevant for one country, and another country may be more reliant on district heating, for example. But I like very much what you say. One common element, and then it can be adapted, and the access to the to all the training material. I think that's also very relevant, of course.
No, thank you very much.
But it's an area we're looking into.
No, that's great to hear. And Mick, if you would like to share a bit from the US experience.
Certainly. First, it's an honor to be here, and I'm learning quite a bit. So from a US experience, we have similar issues that I'll talk about this afternoon in the workshop, and that is, rather than having individual nations, we have individual states. And each state gets to make its own rules. So we can all start with the master plan, but then as they're modified for each different location, then there has to be some local training available also in order to make sure that not only is the main standard understood, but how it's modified for the particular country in your case. So I congratulate you on moving forward. We're also looking at translating to different languages because our members have said similar things. We need it in the language that our builders know, that our contractors know, that our engineers know, and that our building owners know. So congratulations.
Thank you very much, Mick. So to start the conversation, I'm looking at Johann and Laurent. What would you have in mind? I'm also looking from the audience side at Francis and Dusan, representing France and Slovakia. And actually, we did an online pilot training in Slovakia in collaboration with our REHVA member association. But if you would like, I think also that microphone is working. There was a question. Yeah, Robert, please.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Robert Pinter and representing European Copper Institute. I like very much this initiative and somehow I really support the European scheme. My first question is that how far we are from this common European scheme, if you have an experience in different member states. And especially to those 4 countries, participating in this program, that how did you manage national differences? If you have, because as I know, each country has got a different calculation methodology. So if you have a European EPB approach in your system, and there is a national difference, is there possible to handle it? Or those national differences have to be eliminated and you need to take over fully the European calculation methodology? So that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah,
I see Johann. You can try to see if it works.
It works? Okay, yeah.
Voilà.
Yeah, I mean, there is a past and there is a future. In the past, it's clear that some countries are more advanced and had already methods than others because the sensibility to this topic was different in the different countries. And then the future. And the future, I think, what we are doing here with the CEN-CE project, as Laurent said, of course, my wine is the best. It's always the same, so I will not speak against CEN-CE, of course. But I see really that the sense of the history is this, to come to something European-wide, because already, I mean, for industrials, why a heat pump, so when you come to the real performance of the heat pump, why it should be calculated in a different way in one country or in another. As Laurent would say, the basic are the physics, and the physics are the same. Of course, what could be different, as Pau said, for example, when it comes to domestic hot water consumption, then you don't have the same in each country. But then, okay, the method could be still the same, but only the parameters are different. Okay, so this is the point. So now, how coming to this? How we can move to this coming together? I see that most of the European countries, they have a very strong link between regulation, so building codes, and standardization. And so a lot of countries refer to national standards, but you may know that in Europe, when we have a CEN standards, then the standardization institutes, they are obliged to take over the European standards. So what happens now is sometimes it is taken over, but with a certain delay. So we see that in the future, we see that the countries are taking them over, but not always. It takes always a little bit more time. There is a delay to take the recent standards. And why I'm also very optimistic to see that the sense of the history will be the common European method is because there is a complexity. So complexity gets greater, it's bigger and bigger. If you want to construct a heating system with a with a boiler and a radiator, it's quite straightforward, I would say. And the complexity is not the same when you do it with a heat pump, with solar panel, with a storage tank, with export-import and things like this. And then the move is clearly to hourly methods. We have now monthly and hourly methods. And then why each country should spend money, reinvent the wheel again to make this step to the hourly method. It's much easier and cost-effective and time-effective to take over a common developed method. So I think that, okay, we have the past, we have the future, but the history is very clear. Maybe it will take a little bit time. And how to slow up this time, this depends on us.
And basically our exchange here today supports this fastening. I saw Klaus. Francis, you want to go first? Please, Klaus.
Klaus Andreasen from Denmark. Actually, we participated in an EU project, Proof Track, also in H 2020. And there was also some processes of learning of how to do things and training sessions. It was a complete disaster from the industry side because they said, why should we participate? It's not a law in Denmark. So the companies would only participate if it's a legislation. I said, why should we spend time with something that we are not sure will be a rule in Denmark? So I had 0 participants.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is one of the big issues. I am 200% pro this because I think it's the right way to go. But how, the hell, do we get the industry to participate in this and be a part of this? That's my big question.
Yeah.
Yes, just, well, in France we are, roughly speaking, in the same position. But I'm quite optimistic. You know, in 2001, with a Swiss colleague, Claude-Alain Roulet, we were in charge to evaluate all the European regulation on energy efficiency in buildings. It was a mess. Some countries, they didn't have at the time. Some others were quite advanced, like Denmark. Others balanced, like France, and so on. In 2002, with EPBD, we first agreed on the same methodology. Okay? And so the next step now is we will converge to the method, to the calculation method. And in my opinion, as Johann said, it's the sense of history. Of course, maybe we are facing the same problem in France. It's not in the French standard right now, in the law. But we can see some, let's say, evolution.
Yeah.
And I'm quite optimistic, and I hope that in few years we will join the common method, the European one. And I think for industry, it's obvious, because there is no industry working only in Denmark or only in France. So it's the first benefit is for them, in my opinion. So it's why I'm quite optimistic, and really I thank you for this effort. We made the French translation. We had a voluntary task force in our association, and we spent 2 months or something like that. A small group. So it's not a big effort, and it's a big benefit, because it's really a lot of information in the documents you are delivering. As you said, you have the fundamentals, the explanation of the fundamentals. You can test with small examples. You can go further, and it's a really efficient tool. So thank you, Matt.
Maybe I completely agree with you. I also see, I also see that something the industry is not pushing. And I really, I do not understand why they are not pushing, because as Francis said, they are the first beneficiary of this. Because otherwise, but maybe they do not understand it. I don't know if they do not understand it. Because they are still very product orientated. And they are not thinking, maybe they are not aware about, not all of them, I can give you some examples, but maybe they are not aware how that their product in the future and already now is not evaluated as a product, like they are still in the eco-design environment where the product is evaluated as a product. And they do not integrate that the product is evaluated in the building code. So if the heat pump or the boiler has a lower efficiency, then maybe the building code requirements will not be reached, and then the product is out of the market. Maybe they are not aware about this, but now and maybe they do not. I talked with some of the big industrial all over Europe. I say, do you know that for your product to be considered in the building regulation, you need to put your product in 29 European in national calculation models in the databases? And how much it costs you to make this effort to put it in the 29 national databases? And they didn't know, because this information, the national information, is not, it stays on the national level, and it is not moving up to the, let's say, European headquarters and something like this. Some industrials are very much, of course, which are European and worldwide, they know this, and they are trying to push, but they are individuals. And then again, I come back, the changes will not be done alone. The changes will be made only if we all, and this is there where I join you, are pushing together in the same direction. If there is something in France related to the building regulation, where our national association is part of the discussions, we should stay up and say, we do not understand why our professionals will be trained on a national method that they cannot go with their clients outside, because some of the building promoters have also buildings outside in Italy, in Germany, and in other countries. We cannot assist them because we are trained on our national method. So if all of our national countries, national associations stand up and say to the building regulators this message, then, and if we are supported in addition by the industry, then I think that this will be the way how it could be changed faster. But until this, and we say mea culpa also for the French, it was not the case. Why? Because the link between the national level and the European level was not made.
Good morning. My name is Dusan Petraj, and also Slovakia was mentioned as the one of the country where implementation of this project will be done. I have two remarks. First, I completely agree with Johann that we have 20 years of discussion and implementation of different methods from the European Union point of view. I think that it's time that we should be united in methods. And I think in my country is no discussion about it. Of course, on the other hand, there are some small differences in climate, in material, in technology, and it's but it is not problem of the how to make calculations. Exactly. It's only there are parameters which could be in database, which could be as the appendix or how it say national appendix of each country. It means from this point of view, we are supporting this way what was presented here, and I think that most of the country, and especially what was said, we need also some united tool. Because if I am doing energy certificate in Slovakia, in spite of the fact that I will use the same methods with my national tool or something else, sometimes we can get, okay, I agree that physics is the same, but sometimes the results are different. You know what I mean? And it is very important also. So the first remarks, I completely agree that REHVA maybe should play key role to how it say in English, Mr. President, unified, okay? And the second, in spite of the fact that here is the project, and I hope that we will be able to help by implementation. I am from Slovak University of Technology, and my colleague, Associate Professor Michal Krajčík, prepare extraordinary textbook. It means that our professional engineers are looking to more and more information, and it was said by somebody, they don't have time to, many of them, they will never understand English, they will never teach in English or something like that. And they are looking really for some materials. I think that Johann or Andrei, he said it, in national language. It means that they could understand. They are not depending on the some EU standards, some EU regulations. They can understand it. And I think that it can be profitable, that we will be able to develop these materials in national languages. So, but I am supporting this project very well.
Thank you, Dusan. We give back the microphone to Paul. Please, Paul, go ahead.
Sorry, just a comment, because I really like what you said about the changes in 2001, 2002, that it was a big mess. I would say that it's still a bit of a mess. But perhaps we've moved from something that was Pollock style paint splatter to something that is a bit more cubist. So there is a bit more organization at the moment. No, I think it's very necessary to have a common engine, a common methodology to evaluate, because it has two main advantages, I think. One is that even if there are differences between the member states, and to a certain degree there have to be differences between member states, because at the end of the day we are dealing with an existing building stock. And we are dealing with a historical background and everything. So having a common methodology, even if there are certain factors that are a bit different or certain elements that are a bit different, it still makes the translation between the two of them much, much easier than it would be otherwise. It's just a matter of applying some different factors or seeing how, but we speak kind of like the same mathematical language. The other aspect is a comment that I get very often. It's like, oh, why do we need a common EPC methodology, for example, if like buildings are always on the same member state? Yes, buildings don't move around. That's true. Products do. A lot of the products that we use in the EU, they may be manufactured in different member states. So we need to maximize and we need to make this mobility as easy as possible. And the other element that we also mustn't forget is buildings don't move, products move, money moves. And we have a lot of financial institutions that are very interested on providing money and finance for energy efficiency. And that's not so much on the primary market, on the mortgage market, on the loans directly to users. There is a lot of interest on the secondary market. So financial institutions, mortgage aggregators, pension schemes that they say we want to invest green. For that we have the taxonomy, but it's also very good to have a methodology that makes it understandable and makes it coherent across different member states and different ways of doing the things. So it's, even though there are differences, and I really think there have to be some differences, we can't escape them right now. That allows us to at least to be able to speak the same language, even though we need to translate them.
We have another question. Thank you, Paul, very much.
Hello, my name is Anatolis Bornets. I'm representing Latvia here. And there is now another issue about the training and all the energy efficiency and languages, what we are speaking, the language between energy auditor and HVAC engineer. So there is a huge gap. So if while the energy auditor is responsible for nothing, at least in Latvia, so HVAC engineer is responsible for the temperature to be, I don't know, plus 22 under minus 20 outside. If something happens, he is responsible. He will get all the penalties and all the complaints. And that is why I see in Latvia, okay, we have EPBD. We're trying to implement it for energy auditors, so it's really complicated. There are COP, which will rise during the year. But when comes HVAC engineer, he has his own set of tools, very simplified, but he knows that it will work. So it will be less efficient maybe, and how to bring them together, and how to put maybe energy auditor to be responsible for the final result. So there is a nice calculator, we are using COP, etc. But yeah, there is a load that should be taken into account. Yeah, just a remark.
Also, Martin, yes, please.
Hello, Martin Talfeld from Estonia. So some thoughts that I got, maybe a question. What do you think when EPB standards will be revised next? How large would be the change? Because our experience from Estonia is that we have to revise the methodology every 5 years, and then everyone says it's too frequent, we can't follow what's happening. And that could be like one issue. And the other, we are not really using, we are using similar methods, but we are not using EPB standards. But I'm quite sure that if an energy specialist would like, it would be allowed. So in principle, in the legislation, it is allowed to use alternative methods. To give an example, you have to take into account PV self-consumption. You can use just a tabulated value from some table, or you can do hourly calculation if you want, or if you just can't fit in these requirements. So this like voluntary or like an alternative use of using these EPB standards might also help to roll them out. Okay.
Thank you very much, Martin. Please make.
So when you come back to the standardization rules, because there is some procedures in the standardization, general procedures. So there is what they call a systematic review every 5 years. But it is just, you just make the point every 5 years to say that if the standards need to be updated or not to be updated. And then very often the standards are not updated because they are still on the same technical level or things like this. So, I think when you look on the EPB standards and the standards which I know more than the others, which are in the Ashbach system, but I would say that probably Laura will correct me. That I don't see, there are some standards which are changed fundamentally. For example, the storage standard, because it is more moving to dynamics, and which makes sense. Before we didn't have this problematic so much. But the other standards, in principle, did not change so much. So if you are used to the old ones, you easily understand the new ones. Maybe there are some, now there are more details, for example, in the heat pump standards, because of there is more consideration given to the product characterizations, because now you have this product data will be more available and more detailed, and this will be taken into account, things like this. But this, I think, it is beneficial for the reliability of the calculation method.
Yes, I don't expect so many changes. And both heat pumps and storage, the concept were already there. Exactly. The difference is that now it's really spelled into up to the last equation. So it's much more clear. But nothing so special, at least for these kind of standards.
Thank you. We are already time. We will take 2 more interventions from the room, and then we will wrap up, because I don't want to be in between you and lunch. Never.
Just in listening to the conversation, 2 thoughts. First, let's keep our eyes on the goal. I think the goal is to reduce energy usage and to reduce our environmental emissions. And when we find partners who have that same goal, they can help us pull this through rather than us pushing it through. Next, everywhere, the building industry has a lot of different stakeholders. The financial people, the building owners, manufacturers, the constructors, the designers. And when we find and can offer a value to them, they will also pull. So how do we find the value in order for us all to reach that goal? And I think when we do that, then this will occur more quickly the way you want it to occur.
Thank you. And Milos, you also wanted to, or I misinterpreted? Okay, sorry. Well, it's time now to release you to lunch. Thank you very much for having participated. I just want to thank also the other REHVA member associations, of course, Johann, just a second, that have been today from Slovenia. Uroš, thank you very much for coming. Of course, Milos from Czechia, and Adelio from Portugal. We have quite a nice coverage already. And before I make the closing remarks, Johann, please, you have a microphone.
Yeah, Laurent did a very detailed presentation to show you what are the different, how the CEN-CE scheme is structured. So it is structured from, it comes from the standards, it take out from the standards, as in the handbook, the equations. The equations are explained in a logical order. The equations were then taken over in an Excel sheet, so you can play with it, you can calculate with it, and then you have also the basics, the physical basics explained and things like this. So I see that it seems to me that the structure is not so stupid, and maybe it could be shared with international associations also. And this is the topic what we want to have. We wanted to have somewhere a common structure of the training, because then it is also related, because we want to come to a common certification of the HVAC experts. But to have the common certification, you need a common training structure. So if you think that this is something which could be overtaken, and so that at the end we can create something like a European brand, maybe CEN-CE or REHVA CEN-CE, or I don't know how to call it, which is then like a, like a European common certification brand. So if you think that this could be interesting for your country, then I would advise you to contact Andrei to discuss it in the details and how it could be overtaken. And if we reach this at the end of the workshop, then I think it was a very successful workshop.
Thank you, Johann. Basically, I don't need to close. I was about to say the same thing. I put my business card on the table. Most of you already know me. We are in contact, so just reach out. I'm also working for the EPB Center as executive director, so I'm your entry point, as Johann pointed out. And just to make a correction, in my mind, I feel that the Republic of Moldova, they are also Romanians. So I forgot to mention Ludmila, who is still outside of us, but you're getting in the European Union on a fast track, so I think things will move in the right direction, also in terms of building performance policy and methodology. I make one last link. I have some slides, but most of you already know REHVA, so you will receive them. We have, let's say, complementary services, more information on building performance. And you can follow us as REHVA, as EPB Center, to be kept up to date. Newsletter, social media, whatever you prefer. We are on all of these channels. And we have a linked workshop this afternoon. Most of you know about it, but I'll just reiterate. It's at 4:15 in Rotterdam C. It's right across the Rotterdam A, where all the plenary meetings are taking place. And there we will go a bit, we will zoom out a bit. We will look generically at the EPB standards, how it looks in Europe, in China, and in the US. And again, it will be followed by a stimulating conversation like the one you animated. So a big thank you to all of you for having come. And enjoy lunch and networking. And remember to go after lunch to the next sessions.